And welcome back to EDH Deck Building. I am your host, Demo, and this is 10 cards for you to build your deck around that obviously is not your commander, okay? So this is a card in the 99 that you're going to be building and strategizing your deck around. And I just recently did a patron deck tech for one of my patrons, and they wanted Elbrus the Blinding Blade as sort of their secret commander, right? That is the term that sometimes gets used. Sometimes you have a creature, whether it be legendary or non-legendary, in the 99 of your deck that you're actually building your deck around. Elbrus is an interesting one. 7 mana, legendary artifact equipment, and equipped creature gets +1/+0, equip 1. But when it deals combat damage to a player, you unattach it and transform it. And on the back, it is Withengar Unbound, a legendary creature demon, 13/13, flying, intimidate, trample. Whenever a player loses the game, put 13 +1/+1 counters on Withengar Unbound. So that ability in itself sort of screams multiplayer, right? That ability doesn't really do anything in a 2-player game. I mean, it literally does nothing in a 2-player game. So that really screams this card should be played in a multiplayer game. So neat in Commander, and I thought it was an interesting idea for him to build his deck around this card. So let's talk about 10 more cards that are interesting to build your deck around, and getting to the obvious ones first. Stuffy Doll, 5 mana construct, 0/1, indestructible. When it enters the battlefield, you choose a player. Whenever it's dealt damage, it deals that much damage to the chosen player. Tap, Stuffy Doll deals 1 damage to itself. And I have a patron that built a deck around this. In fact, he puts this in almost all of his decks because he loves this card. I've seen a couple people with Stuffy Doll decks. It's a really interesting one to build your deck around because it only targets a single player. So that can make things really, really difficult for you. So you need a way to either blink it so it comes back into place so you can pick another player, or you have to copy it and create copies targeting your other opponents. And then of course you're just going to be dealing a whole bunch of damage to it in various ways and shooting your opponents to the face with it. So it's a very interesting one. I think it's a pretty difficult one to build a deck around personally, but it is one that people go after quite a bit. Another one that I have a patron that built a deck around and have seen in Commander games before is Door to Nothingness. 5 mana artifact. Door to Nothingness enters the battlefield tapped, and you can play double Wooburg and tap, sacrifice Door to Nothingness, target player loses the game. So this is a really interesting one to build around. I believe they had used Ramos as their commander because Ramos gives you the mana you need to activate your Door to Nothingness, which is pretty interesting. But again, only targets 1 player, so you can have one guy lose the game, then you got to get it back, you got to use it again on another opponent. It's a little bit of a drudge there to actually make this work, but it is an interesting one to build your deck around. Next up, we have Tamanoa, red, green, white, spirit, 2/4. Whenever a non-creature source you control deals damage, you gain that much life. And I just talked about this in my 10 cards video, and this is definitely a card that you could build your deck around. And this for sure would be like a secret commander, right? Because this really feels like a legendary creature, would make a fantastic commander, and it would be very easy to build your deck around this ability, obviously. Any non-creature source dealing damage gains you life. So you could do a life gain theme, you could do a lot of different things here. And it's not that difficult. In Naya colors, right, whatever your commander might be, it's going to be pretty easy for you to get your Tamanoa. The only problem, of course, being doesn't go back to the command zone when it dies, and you have to build around that kind of stuff as well. But because this ability is so powerful, it would be really easy for you to build around it and would make a great secret commander. An enchantment that I think would be really interesting to build your deck around is Psychic Battle. 3 blue enchantment, and buckle up for this one. Whenever a player chooses 1 or more targets, each player reveals the top card of their library. The player who reveals the card with the highest mana value may change the target or targets. If 2 or more cards are tied for the highest, the target of targets remain unchanged. Changing the targets this way doesn't trigger abilities of permanents named Psychic Battle. So I originally mentioned this card in my Crazy Blue Enchantments video because I just thought this is just wacky and wild and crazy. I thought it was sort of screwing with the game in an interesting way. Obviously, there's a whole lot of words on there. And as I thought about it in that video, I'm like, actually, you know what? This is a pretty powerful ability if you can build around it. And I threw this in a deck just to try it out. And man, is this ability ever powerful. Being able to choose the targets for everything that happens in a commander game is unbelievably good. You can even choose the creatures that your opponents attach their equipment to, because that is targeting. Can you build your entire deck around this? I mean, obviously you would have to make sure that you're winning the battle, right? You have to make sure you get something really expensive on top of your deck. And once you do that, you probably want to keep it there, right? Sensei's Divining Top would be perfect fit for that, because you can just keep rearranging the top of your library and keeping that Draco on top of your library or whatever to ensure that you win all those battles. Now, this is not a win con like a lot of the other cards on this list are. It is just such a powerful effect to be able to choose all the targets in a commander game that you could pretty much do just about anything else with the rest of your deck. Next up, we have the epic spells, and there's one of each color that came out in Saviors of Kamigawa. They all are very expensive. They all have very powerful effects, and they all have the epic ability, which means for the rest of the game, you can't cast spells. That's pretty brutal. But at the beginning of each upkeep, you copy the spell except for the epic ability, right? So it copies and goes directly onto the stack. Now, I had suggested in one of my 10 deck ideas video doing a Zur Enduring Ideal deck, because I thought Enduring Ideal might be the best of the bunch. Being able to search your library for enchantment and put it directly onto the battlefield. Obviously, there's a lot you can do there. And I thought Zur fit that theme really well, because what Zur will allow you to do is get around the whole casting thing, because it fetches an enchantment itself directly out of your library. So you're not going to be completely screwed as long as your Zur's on the table. There's a couple other interesting ones that would work here. I mean, all of them could close out the game with the abilities that they have. You got to be careful before you cast it, because you can't cast spells for the rest of the game. Eternal Dominion is a really interesting one in an errant street artist deck, right? There is one way that you can get around the whole copy thing. Errant says pay 1 and a blue and tap, copy target spell you control that wasn't cast. You may choose new targets for the copy. And with Eternal Dominion, 7 blue, 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 so 10 mana, that's a lot. Sorcery, search target opponent's library for an artifact, creature, enchantment, or land card. Put that card into play under your control. Then that player shuffles their library. I do not recommend playing this card if you're doing it via webcam. It's a lot easier in person. Can be a really interesting way to close out the game. And in an errant deck, you can copy it. This is one of the fringe ways that you can use Errant's ability, where you are putting a spell directly onto the stack, a copy of Eternal Dominion that you're not actually casting. So when you do that on your upkeep, you can then use Errant's ability to do it again. So it's a great finisher in that deck, I think. Also a great finisher in a Rutha deck for the same reason, right? You have that really expensive spell. You can just pay 2 mana to copy it, and then you copy the epic. So every turn you're getting 2 copies of it. So there is a few interesting ways you can go with these if you choose to build your deck around them. Next up, we got Happily Ever After, 2 and a white enchantment. When Happily Ever After enters the battlefield, each player gains 5 life and draws a card. Okay, that's really nice of you. However, at the beginning of your upkeep, if there are 5 colors among permanents you control, there are 6 or more card types among permanents you control, and or cards in your graveyard, and your life total is greater than or equal to your starting life total, you win the game. So that is most certainly a win con, and most certainly a card that you could build your deck around, and you really would have to, right? First of all, this has got to be in a 5-color deck, right? Because you need those 5 colors. You need 6 permanent types, so you got to make sure you have all those permanent types. You're probably going to wait until the right moment to play this, obviously, right? You're not just going to slap it down. You're going to wait until you have almost all of that stuff fulfilled. Then you're going to slap it down, and then you're obviously going to have to protect it. It's a tough one for sure. You got a lot of hoops to jump through, but if you can pull it off, you just straight up win the game, right? So certainly a card that you can build your whole deck around, I think. Next up, we got Song of Creation. 1, a green, a blue, and a red enchantment. You may play an additional land on each of your turns. That's pretty great. Whenever you cast a spell, draw 2 cards. That's really, really great. However, at the beginning of your end step, discard your hand. So we have 2 really powerful abilities and then a really huge downside. And if you build around this, it can be incredible. I talked about this in one of my earlier 10 deck ideas video, where there actually is enough support in this theme. The theme being I discard my hand at the end step, that you can actually build around it. So Song of Creation being the best option here for building around this theme. There are other options as well where you can sort of play into the same theme. That's why I think this is a viable one for sure. Searching for enchantment enchantments in Temur colors is pretty difficult. In fact, it's pretty much impossible. However, I do have colorless options for you if you want to check that out, right? In fact, any of these, if you're looking for a tutor option that isn't in the usual colors, I have a colorless tutor option video if you actually feel like building around some of these cards, because obviously you got to get them, right? You got to get them in your hand and put them in play before you can start actually building around them. Like I said, for Song of Creation, there are a little bit of lesser options, so you don't absolutely need the Song of Creation, but I think it is definitely a card that you could build your whole entire deck around. Next up, we have one that I mentioned in another one of my 10 cards videos recently, Realm Razor, 3 red, green, and a white beast, 4/2. When Realm Razor enters the battlefield, exile all lands. When Realm Razor leaves the battlefield, return the exiled cards to the battlefield tapped under their owner's control. And I actually had a patron recommend this. I can't believe I forgot about it because I had just done it in a 10 cards video, but I actually asked my patrons on Discord if they had any ideas for cards that you could build your deck around. So a lot of these came from them. And this is one that I can't believe I forgot because it is such a powerful ability. Exiling all lands is ridiculous. And then, of course, when they all come back into play, you're going to get a whole bunch of landfall triggers. So there's a lot of ways you could go with this. You could just build around the idea of exiling everyone's lands and then leaving your Realm Razor in play so that no one has lands. The easier route here is to build around the landfall trigger theme, and you're going to get a whole bunch of those, whether it be yours or your opponent's, right? And again, in Naya colors, searching for creatures is really, really easy. That should not be a problem at all if you choose to build your deck around this guy. Next up, we got a really interesting one, Pestilent Spirit. And again, this is another one that I was recommended by one of my patrons I thought would be an interesting one. 2 and a black spirit, 3/2, menace, death touch. Instants and sorcery spells you control have death touch. And man, this is one of those cards that when you first saw it came out, you're like, where do you use this? Like, it's black. It's giving your instants and sorceries death touch. What deck are you putting this in? I was trying to think of a deck I could put this in. And again, I almost wanted to build a deck around it because I thought it was such a cool card. I'm sure there's a few people out there with maybe Rakdos decks that have lots of burn spells because, of course, your instants and sorceries you want to be dealing damage with so that the death touch will apply, right? Any amount of damage that your spell deals is going to destroy creatures. So that's the route you want to go with this. So you want to put a whole bunch of damaging instants and sorceries in your deck, and you're going to be wiping out your opponent's creatures and possibly yours as well, I guess. Maybe you could fill your deck with indestructible creatures, which of course won't die, or regenerating creatures, stuff like that. So that would be interesting. There's definitely a lot of ways you could go with it. I don't think that you could use this as your commander, right? If you wanted to use this as your actual commander, there's not enough stuff in mono black, I don't think, to actually deal damage. I know there's a few, not sure there's enough instants and sorceries to actually be building a deck around it. I think you want this in the 99 so that you can have red, obviously, because that's going to be your best bet. And lastly today, and this is a really interesting one, Glacial Worm, one of the most interesting cards ever printed in Magic. It is entirely unique. 5 green, green, worm, 9/5 with trample. So he's a big boy. While you're searching your library, you may cast Glacial Worm from your library. That is such a weird and unique, interesting ability. And I encourage you to go and check out the whole rules on this guy. You know, go to Gatherer, look up this card, and there's a whole bunch of stuff there talking about how this actually works. It is the only way in all of Magic that I am aware of where a resolving ability is interrupted, okay? And what I mean by that is if you cast a Rampant Growth and you're searching your library for a land, you're actually going to stop searching your library for a land, cast your Glacial Worm from your library, and then your Rampant Growth will resolve and you'll get your land. That's the only way that I know that a resolving spell is interrupted that way. I don't know if there's any other. It is an entirely unique ability, no question. And what makes this particularly interesting as sort of a secret commander is you can very easily get it out of your library, right? You don't even have to search for it. All you have to do, again, is cast that Rampant Growth. Now you're searching your library and you can cast it from your library. This is a really unique and interesting idea. Again, I got the suggestion from one of my patrons and I got excited about it pretty quickly because I thought that's actually a perfect secret commander because you can cast it from your library. I think is a very, very interesting way to go with it. I mean, you could probably just build a Voltron deck, I guess, right? 9/5 tramples, a pretty big guy. You could throw some equipment on him. You could throw him at your opponents. I mean, it's not going to be commander damage. These are all very janky ideas we're talking about here, obviously, right? They're not fantastic. They are tough build arounds for sure. This is a really fun one. I really like it a lot. There are lots of interesting ways to shuffle your Glacial Worm back into your library in case it gets removed. I think this is a viable one for sure. Very, very interesting one. And I will be building one of these decks. Obviously, in my Building Janky Deck series, there is a poll in the description below. So go vote for which one of these you actually want me to build, and I will do so in my Janky Decks series. But that is it for today, and thanks for tuning in.